Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another new episode of The Lager Line, served to you as always courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team in Houston. Joined by my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal, Paulo Alves. On this show, Saturday, October 14th, we're midway through the Rockets preseason, and thus far, so good. The Rockets are 2-0 with wins over the Pacers at home and Pelicans on the road. Well, I say on the road, it was at Birmingham, Alabama, technically a neutral site, but that's because it's the G League home of the Pelicans, so they were basically giving their G League hub a favor. Nonetheless, Rockets won both of the games. The margins were just incredible, average of more than 25 points per game. Rockets are second in net rating, second in defensive rating, fourth in offensive rating. Of course, it's the preseason. These should be taken with a grain of salt. It's not like other teams are dialing it up in terms of their coverages, their schemes. They're not fully committed. Yet when you see the Rockets winning by 33 against a New Orleans team that has Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas, all their regulars out there, it's hard not to be impressed by the commitment that the Rockets are playing with. So even if we shouldn't take the literal results all that seriously, especially a small sample of just 2 exhibition games, there's 3 more to come next week, starting Monday in San Antonio. Even if the results shouldn't be taken that seriously, the process should be. And for a young Rockets team that's had issues with effort and professionalism the last 3 years, it's just so great to see professional basketball again. I'll be blunt. It feels like the first time in over 3 years that we've seen NBA level basketball in Houston. And to me, more than any individual, this just validates what the Rockets did this offseason in bringing in Ime Udoka, investing heavily in a proven commodity as head coach, paying top 5, top 10 salary, bringing in qualified assistants underneath them. Because to me, more than any individual player, just the way they are communicating, the way they are working together cohesively as a unit, there's a level of structure, there's a level of discipline, there's a level of organization that we never saw, not even in the preseason, under 3 years of Stephen Silas. So before we go into individual standouts, before we talk X's and O's, anything that stood out, that's what we're doing on today's show. For me, what jumps off the page is validation of the process that led the Rockets to Ime Udoka. They're getting what they paid for. I think that's my biggest takeaway from the first 2 games. Paulo, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's just a completely different culture and a completely different mentality from literally everybody on the court that was here last year. You talked about the defense, and I mean, I think we have officially turned to a defensive-centered team, even though, and we do have a lot of defensive prospects. I mean, the entirety of the 2022 draft and this year's draft is guys that are good defensive players. But even offensively, they are playing as selfless as I've ever seen, young guys play. It's like Jalen Green does not give a flying shit about what his numbers are. He will still take a couple of ill-advised shots, but he took 7 shots last game. Alperen Sengun is barely getting any post-ups. Jabari Smith only gets, kind of more selfish shots when he's being used as a release valve and there's not much going on and he has a mismatch. Like Dylan Brooks took 5 shots. I mean, I know we'll get into the individuals of all of these guys, but I think my overarching point is that offensively, these guys, I feel like they're playing by principle and not something as specific as a set or something that they have as a go-to or a guy that they have as a go-to. We see Jalen Green run the pick and roll with Sengun. We see Fred VanVleet run the pick and roll. We see Amen Thompson handle the ball. We see, it's funnily enough, some of the stuff that Steven Salas talked about last year, as far as the first guy that grabs the rebound, most of the times either the one bringing it up with urgency or passing the ball ahead to anybody that's ahead of them. Of course, if there's still people ahead of them, they'll pass it to a guard. But they're trying to. They know that they're good. That the one thing that they absolutely can control is their effort on defense, and they're translating that into offense really well. And I tweeted about it yesterday. It looks exhausting to play against the Rockets because they are going to hound you on defense. They have young guys with a lot of stamina, and the guys that aren't young in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks are guys that are very, very high energy guys on the defensive end. And then on offense, they're always running. And the spacing's not the best, and we've shot pretty poorly from three throughout the first couple of games. But they are still scoring a crap load of points, and it's because nobody stands still ever. And this is not we came from the last time the Rockets were relevant. It was the James Harden offense, right? There were very strict principles. Everybody knew what was going to happen on any given possession. Nowadays, it's not really that. It's every player is looking at the situation they find themselves in the offense and trying to make something happen or make a correct decision. And it's happening. Guys, Jason Tate, I also talked about this on Twitter. It looks like what they told Jason Tate was, hey, so you can shoot, you don't have to shoot. Just move around eternally and never stop. And sometimes it works poorly because he clashes into a guy that's striving. But that mentality, I think, goes across the entire team. And there are some slight elements of more disciplined basketball, right? But to me, the biggest point is there's no first, second, third, fourth offensive option. The structure we clamored for last year, maybe we didn't know what we were talking about because we don't really have it this year, but it works because they are so good on defense that anybody that has the ball, it's not about generating a mismatch, or it's not really about generating an advantage. It's about capitalizing on the small advantage they have because they're so good on defense right away by attacking the other team while they're off balance. And I think they do a pretty good job of any slight, either hesitation or a guy that didn't get back on defense fast enough or anything, or guys are with, or the other team's defense is not on their correct assignments. They're very quick to punish. They're very quick to, just selflessly give the ball up to the guy that's supposed to have it or that is in a better position to capitalize on whatever advantage that is right away. And, I think you can tie that to KPJ not being there, but you can also tie it to Jalen Green having a completely different attitude than what he had last year. Mm-hmm. You can tie it to the fact that Tari Eason and Jabari Smith don't really, or at least to this point, I don't think they feel like they're just role players, right? They're not just sitting in the corner. Jabari Smith gets the ball and he's proactive. He's trying to look for an angle to drive, or he's trying to get a mismatch to try and shoot over somebody. He's very decisive. Tari Eason, he was always a little bit more developed offensively than people gave him credit for. But as I said, anybody on this team right now offensively is being empowered to do or to punish whatever advantage they have without going too far. And it will always, there's always exceptions to that. Sometimes it does. But it's just a very chaotic offense, but it somehow works because of how well the defense plays.
Yeah, I should clarify, when we talk about structure and discipline, I was meaning that predominantly on the defensive end of the floor, where to play the switch-heavy scheme where they're almost switching 5 out. They're partly doing it with Şengün a bit more than last year, but I wouldn't say it's truly 5 out with all P in the game. That takes a lot of discipline. That takes a lot of accountability. It takes a lot of trust, and that's something that even in preseason is noteworthy because you do have to feel in sync with your teammates. You have to trust them. You have to be disciplined in your assignments and covering up for your teammates. Fred VanVleet had a great quote after last night's game in Birmingham in which he told Jonathan Feigen, no one wants to be the weak link. And that, of course, that's why you bring in veterans like Fred, like Dylan Brooks, like Jeff Green, because if you're a young player like Jalen Green, who's not pulling his weight, that's going to stand out a lot more when you're 1 of 5 as opposed to 4 of 5, as we've talked about in the past. So defense has been the foundation. You hold a team like the Pelicans to 87 points, even in the preseason. Look, they started Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, all of their regulars. So that was an impressive performance. They're jumping the passing lanes. They're talking. There's communicating. And then offensively, as you said, Paulo, I think what stands out more than anything is that there is no go-to guy or go-to play or two. They're spreading the wealth. And of course, that ties in, I think, with why they wanted Fred VanVleet instead of James Harden, because with Fred, you have optionality to play different ways. We've seen at times Fred drop in some nice pocket passes and feed guys on the pick and roll, which I do think makes the teammates more likely to cut. If you've played basketball before, you know you're not going to be willing to cut if the passer isn't going to find you when you do. It feels like a waste of effort. Well, Fred does reward them. You see that sometimes. There's been some nice pick and pop with Fred and Jabari, some nice two-man action with Fred and Şengün as well, with Fred operating as something of a traditional point guard. But then you have your Jalen Şengün two-man game at times. You have Jabari freelancing here and there. You have the Şengün offense out of the high post or even on the low block at times. It's very flexible. And beyond just making it sort of chaotic for the opposing defense, as you were laying out, I also think that this may make sense in the big picture for the Rockets, because ultimately we don't know the date, but I think what we know is that if this rebuild goes according to plan, at some point, Amen Thompson is going to be your engine. You're going to give him the keys. And so rather than run everything through Jalen or All P or whoever it might be right now, that doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of getting you where you're going to go, because ultimately we don't know if it'll be this year, maybe it's next year, maybe it's the year after that. But at some point, Amen Thompson is going to be the guy who's fundamentally driving your offense, your engine, so to speak. So with that in mind, it's less of a transition if you don't have a guy now. Does that make sense? Because again, we don't want to put too much pressure on Amen. We should note that at 20 years old, he'll be 21 in January. He is a bit more advanced in terms of his body, physically, mentally, compared to Jalen and Jabari the last couple of years. But because you feel good about Amen ultimately being the traditional point guard, the floor general, the guy that initiates your offense, maybe that makes it all the more logical now not really to commit to any one or two other guys, just spread the wealth until Amen is ready. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it also speaks volumes to the mentality that, at least to this point, we're still 2 games in. The mentality that Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks are coming into this team with, because it's not any guy that gets paid what is for Fred VanVleet max money and comes into a team to be this leader, but then goes on and has 7 shots in a game or is clearly not, he's not even bringing the ball up the floor all the time. Right, this is everybody expected at the very least for him to be the guy that brings the ball to the floor. It's not even like that. So I think the vets are setting the standard there, being unselfish. There are guys that chose to come here and are fine playing that role. And then I think after that everything falls in line. And as far as an option goes, I mean, maybe it's because there really isn't anyone. I mean, I think the closest guy to being a consistent generator of offense or a hub is probably Şengün, but other than him, I don't think there's really anyone that's ready to step up as a number 1 option on a good team yet. Mm-hmm. I think Jalen will eventually be that, but I also think that a lot of his game will always be off ball. Jabari Smith is showing some flashes of developing into that, which is really exciting, and I completely didn't see coming. Amen Thompson may become that down the line just because of his athleticism, his skill level, and his ability to pass the ball, because to be a hub, you have to be able to pass the ball as well. But I think we haven't had a close game yet. And I think we'll start to see some sort of pecking order when
it's the last 5 minutes and there's high leverage possessions.
Exactly. When the game slows down and they aren't able to run the chaos that they create on defense through to the offense, I think then we'll see what the fundamental principles of their offense is, who gets the ball in those situations. I have a inkling that it might be Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün pick and roll.
I think so too.
Because that's I think that's the play that we've seen the most that kind of stands out as maybe their go-to option.
Well, and it gives you the most diversity because you have playmaking potential on both sides of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe that's it, but we really haven't been able to see it. And as long as we're not able to see it, it means things are going either really well or really poorly, because we really aren't getting that close. No games that are that close. To speak a little bit on the, just we're talking in general, to speak a little bit on obviously the Pacers game was against, a bunch of nobodies, which sometimes is harder than a bunch of superstars that are playing on a preseason game they don't care about, but still, that game wasn't, all that exciting to I mean, it was exciting to watch them play, but it wasn't, you weren't beating a good team. The Pelicans had a lot of talent. Zion Williamson was, I mean, if you consider what he was doing playing, he was playing. Brandon Ingram, well, I mean, he took, what, 2 shots? I mean, come on. So, I mean, they were playing their best guys, and if you've been a Rockets fan for even just a few years, you know that CJ McCollum loves to go off against them, and he wasn't able to. But yeah, just this Pelicans team is supposed to be a good team. And what happens a lot of the times with teams that are making the transition between a rebuild and a contender, which even though further along than the Rockets, the Pelicans are, it's important to kind of get on a roll and set the tone early, even though it's just preseason games. It's very easy for a young team to have things not go right very early on, even though this is just preseason. It could still happen from this point until the first quarter of the season, but it's important for things to go right early to get players to believe in the system, because with young teams especially, but as quickly as things can go wrong, guys abandon the system and they start thinking, oh, I have to do more to help the team, or if we're not winning anyways, I might as well get mine. That doesn't seem to be the philosophy with the Pelicans. They didn't really seem to care that much, or at least their most important players didn't, which I don't think is good for them going forward. But it's good for the Rockets, because I suspect the Pelicans and Rockets will be fighting for the same things throughout the season. So if the Pelicans start off cold, because I mean they didn't really seem too invested into these games, that'll be good for us moving forward. And I think that they may be a team. I also tweeted about this earlier today. I think they may be a team that we have a better record than, if you are able to hold at least the defensive effort that we're putting in up to this point.
Well, and I saw your tweet talking about how this team may not be as far away from the playoffs or the play-in mix as you think. And even though we have plenty of individuals to get to, and I feel like we're burying the lead a little bit when we talk about the growth of some of these young prospects, we'll get to that. But while we're talking about general themes and the team as a whole, I want to talk about why this team may not be as far away as people who just strictly look at the record the last couple of years. I think it's important to note that besides bringing in veterans like Fred, like Dylan, like Jeff, there's a lot of margins that can be made up quickly when you are collectively trying to win. I guess the way I would phrase it the last couple of years, and there's a coaching upgrade as well, we should note that goes hand in hand with some of this. But the Rockets' record in a lot of respects was artificially low, because between the coaching, between the incentive to get a higher draft pick, because it was the years that you fully controlled your draft capital, they just were not paying attention to little things at the margin. Like last year, not having, it's not only Kevin Porter Jr. as your point guard, it's not having any backup at all and giving minutes to guys like Daishen Nix and Ty Washington that were below replacement level. Just by actually caring about the margins, which they clearly do now, and treating each game with a sense of urgency and going into it with a certain level of commitment, that in and of itself raises the floor a lot more than simply what the record was a year ago. And so I think when people look at this team, they say, look, this is a better product, but you're starting from 22-60. How many more wins can you reasonably expect? And to me, it's not so much just, okay, you have a 22-60 team and you're adding in Fred and Dylan and a rookie, Amen Thompson. It's more you're adding those pieces plus the new coaching staff, plus a general commitment day in, day out to actually care, to actually run your organization professionally. And so for me, I guess what I keep going back to, I think the record the last couple of years was a bit artificially soft simply due to the circumstances. So on top of the upgrades the Rockets have made in terms of personnel, coaching, and so on and so forth, I think there's also a slight bump they're going to get simply from having day in, day out relevance and actually caring. So because of that, to get to, say, the mid-30s wins range, which is what it would take to be at least on the fringe of play-in contention, it might not be quite as much of a reach as some people think, strictly looking at last season's record. I think that's what your tweet was sort of getting at as well, right?
Yeah, I think I said this before on the pod a lot of times. The hardest thing to get with the young team is getting them to commit on defense. And the Rockets drafted, a lot of athletic guys. And, well, usually athleticism translates to defense pretty well. And so my point was kind of, if they're already at this level and they're able to sustain it, it's not that hard to take this as, once this is the base at the end of the season, it's not hard to, while they're playing this well, I could point out 5 or 6 different things that they could easily adjust, even just personnel wise, that would, make the team better right now. And this is not accounting to young guys developing, because defense gives you that floor that you talked about. But because the Rockets rotation is made up of, and hopefully we'll get into Cam Whitmore, but hopefully he stays in the rotation, is made up of 6 guys that are 22 or younger. It makes it so if they're able to retain the floor that they're playing, this is the floor. Well, the ceiling is extremely high, because all of these guys can get better. The system, it's just preseason, but these guys can get better. The system can be better tailored around them. Ime Udoka still has to get to know these guys. They have to get to know each other. And there is a clear deficiency in shooting. And so it's not really hard. It's an enormous upgrade from what we had last year, which is why at the same time, I don't want to, be too optimistic and say they'll get 40 wins. But at the same time, if they did, it would kind of make sense, because things were going so wrong before. And we've talked about it. It's not just the talent and the culture. It's that, the system that we ran offensively and defensively actively worked against the strength of our players, right? We played Sengun in a super deep drop. We played small ball 5s and didn't switch and stayed in drop. We did a lot of stuff that actively worked against our players, and just not, that's why it's not hard to imagine that just not doing that, and then adding on to, it's like going from a negative 20, not just to a neutral, but to a plus 15. There's a lot of gap to be made up there, and getting guys to buy in is the first big step for any rebuilding team. And you watch them play, and it's like, this is the level that you need right now to make. And I know the West is tough. I think this is the level right now you need to make the play-in. I mean, we've watched the previous few years. Teams aren't playing that much better than this in the playoffs, let alone the play-in. And you look at it, and you can still see so many ways to improve, which made me tweet that. It's not hard to imagine a world where they make the play-in this year, and they have so many avenues to get better, that next year they could, make a leap again, not as big of a leap because, they started off really low, but make a significant leap again, kind of like the Grizzlies went from a rebuilding team to a play-in team to a playoff team right away.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and it's not off the back of just one guy like they did with Ja Morant, and to give credit also to Jaren Jackson and Desmond Bane, but it would be the ideal scenario where you're starting to raise your floor without sacrificing your ceiling, which would be trading young guys for vets. No, they just brought in vets at no cost. I mean, at least at no asset cost. And so that's what I was getting into as far as they are. If this is their level this year, I wouldn't have any trouble believing that they may be a playoff team a lot sooner than a lot of people would expect.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. And again, some of this is just structural. It's not so much trying to downplay how bad they were the last couple of years. They absolutely were. But there was a little bit of sort of by design to that. And so on top of factoring in the additions this offseason and everything that you brought with new coaching as well, just the change in emphasis, once you start to move things in a positive direction, there's going to be some really awful things from the last couple of years that are going to be in the rearview mirror that I don't think are going to be considerations moving forward. And so that in and of itself may be a slight bump in terms of your win-loss differential that may make the Rockets more competitive sooner than you think. At least that's what we hope. All right, let's talk individuals, because, again, the team stuff, while I think, again, the commitment they're playing with, that's noteworthy, because even if the results should be sort of have an asterisk placed on them because it's the preseason, the process, the professionalism of it should not, because that's exactly what they were lacking for much of the last 3 seasons under Stephen Silas. more noteworthy is the individuals, because when you have a team that's at least partly comprised of young prospects, the way that this one is, you want to see going into each year who's taken the leap. And while 2 preseason games is a bit early to say that conclusively, to me, the standouts when you look at the rotation, so you've got your 5 starters, and we knew who those would be going in. Fred, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen, Şengün. And then off the bench, the top 3 seem to be Amen Thompson, who's earned a lot of trust already, and then Jae'Sean Tate and Tari Eason. That seems to be the clear top 8 when it comes to the circle of trust for Ime Udoka at the moment. In terms of looking at those 8, I would say certainly the standout is Jabari, just continuing what we saw in Summer League. His handle has gotten a ton better. I thought one play against the Pelicans that stood out was the 3-pointer he stepped into from 25, 26 feet at nearly the top of the key, for him to not only have the leg strength to drive that in, but the fluidity to do it off the bounce, the self-creation. He's showing elements of his game that a year ago, even in preseason, he just did not have. And last night against the Pelicans, 22 points, 9 rebounds on strong efficiency. There's a world, and Jackson Gatlin tweeted this last night, where he might be your best player by the end of this season. His star is rising in a big way. But beyond Jabari, a couple other guys I want to highlight. I think Alperen Şengün has been less of a defensive liability than a lot of people were afraid he might be. They're not all out switching with him, but he's held his own, and he's been used a bit more aggressively than Stephen Silas used him a year ago. That was always a bit curious because, again, the data as a rookie showed that on switches he actually fared pretty well. And then for whatever reason, Stephen largely went away from it in year 2. I think Şengün's been very active. He's a high IQ guy, and the hope obviously is that his strengths and his intellect as just a guy who sees the floor so well, is often a couple of seconds ahead of the action, can sort of offset whatever the physical limitations might be in terms of not being a traditional rim protector, not being an elite athlete and above the rim type, etc. But I think more than, well, I don't want to say more because Jabari has been incredible. But what, at least for me, may have stood out above everything else, at least relative to expectations, Amen Thompson is well beyond his years when it comes to how poised he is as an NBA rookie. There were possessions last night, and I'm watching defense a lot because that's the area of the court where I think you want to see the most growth, and it's where the Rockets have stood out these first couple of games. There were possessions against the Pelicans where Jalen Green was a step slow on his rotations, and yet Amen was locked in. He is doing things as a rookie, having not even played in an NBA game yet, that Jalen Green in year 3 is still learning to do. Now, that's not me throwing shade at Jalen because this does take time in terms of being a winning player. We've listed his archetypes in the past, guys like Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Zach LaVine. It typically takes them a number of years. Some of those things that we're looking for from Jalen, Amen is doing them right now. And you combine that with the fact that at 6'7", he has similar athleticism to Jalen, but a couple more inches. The potential is just off the charts. Now, that's not to say it's all been perfect. He needs to get better, especially the game against Indiana. He needs to, I think a lot of this is just when he played for the overtime elite, there wasn't nearly the combination of physical bigs and athleticism. So in that setting, he could just simply elevate over or around guys. It's a bit harder in the NBA, so his finishing at the rim is going to take some getting used to, I think, the enhanced quality of competition that he faces once he blows by his initial defender, which he almost always can because he's just a 99th percentile athlete the first second he steps on a floor. But I think finishing at the rim, he's got to adjust to everything that NBA quality bigs can do with their athleticism, their technique, the ability to defend and go vertical without fouling. It's not to say that Amen has been perfect, but in terms of just staying within himself, making the right reads, not just offensively where you want to see that as the point guard, but defensively, being in sync with his rotations, not doing what you typically see from rookies in terms of trying to make the highlight plays, not like he's trying to jump the passing lanes every time or take it on himself to go 1-on-5 offensively. The fact that he's able at this age, having not even played in an NBA game yet, to be this poised and do the little things, it's easy to see why Ime Udoka named him at the end of the first week of training camp as the standout. And it's easy to see why, even in a year where the Rockets, they're committed to winning. They've talked about how nothing's going to be guaranteed for the rookies. It's not going to be like Jalen and Jabari the last couple of years. And yet Amen is already clearly, in my opinion, the sixth man off the bench, the guy that Ime trusts the most. Jabari is the standout just simply from the standpoint of the stats. When you look at their preseason stats through 2 games, averaging 18 points a game, 8 boards in 23 minutes, shooting better than 60% from the field, and God, just 83% on threes, which is obviously unsustainable, but let's enjoy it while we can. I think when you account for how young he is and the inexperience, the positive signs from Amen Thompson might be every bit as strong as they are for Jabari. I think that's what stands out to me. Jalen, Fred, it's not so much that I'm disappointed in them. It's just we're largely getting what we expected from them. I would say the same with Dylan, although he didn't really play that much in the opener simply because he was ejected after 5 minutes. It is what it is. That comes to the territory of Dylan Brooks. Tari Eason, he is what he is. To me, it's Jalen, Amen, and to a slightly lesser extent, Şengün's defense. Those are the leading storylines. What have you seen in terms of, I guess, the top 8 in any individual narratives that are starting to flash after 2 games?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I didn't pay as much attention to Amen Thompson as a lot of people did. It's just there's so much going on with so many players. It's all so different that it's hard to focus on every single player. I've actually been paying attention to Jalen the most on the defensive end, so that's what I've been picking up. And about him, listen, I mean, I keep mentioning that I had a tweet about something. Well, I had a tweet about something again that I think was a little bit misinterpreted, in which I said, just like we talked about when we were previewing the season, if you're paying attention to Jalen in specific, I think he's the guy that's making the most defensive mistakes on the team. And it's sticking out like a sore thumb because, well, nobody else is making them really. I mean, Şengün is not a great defender, but he's been mostly in the right spots, and he has weekends, and I'll get into him a little bit later. But on defense, he's trying, right? And I can tell that he's trying. He still needs to get better at getting around screens. But I think he needs to get better. What he needs to get better the most at is just not losing track of this guy and picking up the defensive system, because he messes up switches a little bit too much. He'll, his guy will be, repositioning or running through screens. He'll lose track of it. He'll get beat on defense as well. I mean, make no mistake about it, he's a lot better. He's trying a lot more than he did last year. But like we predicted, in a team that plays such good defense, he's sticking out a little bit as not being as good. And that's something that he'll have to work on. And I've been impressed with his commitment, and I've been impressed with on offense, since we're talking about Jalen, I've been impressed with his willingness to pass and his willingness to just not be the guy. As I said, he took 7 shots this game. I don't know how many he took the first game. He took 12. Okay, that's a little bit more normal. But he took 7. Team was winning. He didn't force it. It all went great. He's still not making his threes, but whatever. I still think watching him play, it's not really that natural for him to be a passer, but it's getting better. I think he still predetermines a little bit of the reads he's going to have to make, before the play even starts. And ideally, eventually, we want him to, read the defense and react to it, not predetermine what he's going to do on a drive the moment he starts driving the ball. That it leads to some turnovers. It leads to forcing some passes that really doesn't need to. That being said, I mean, he is passing the ball a lot volume-wise versus when you compare that to how much he's trying to shoot it. So that's a good sign, at least mentality-wise. But I think Jalen is the guy that's been sort of underwhelming. Hopefully, I know he'll get better at it. He's still, my favorite player. So I'm criticizing him because I have higher expectations for him than I do anybody else. I wanted to touch on just a few quick things. I think Tari Eason is more athletic this year than he was last year. I think he's getting more lift when he's dunking. He was missing some dunks. He was, he looked kind of flat sometimes. He is very athletic. Make no mistake, right? Perfect measurements for what a 3-and-D wing looks like in the NBA. But last year, it seemed like he needed just a little bit more bounce. And this year, I think he's got it. I think he's comfortably getting his dunks off. He's comfortably, I think he just looks in a better place physically than he did last year. So I want to touch on that. I think Jabari, as you know, he's my number one standout performer. It's just kind of night and day from what it was last year. And, there were some games where Jabari looked like this last year, but this is basically what he's looked like since Summer League for the entire time. So it's already a bigger sample size than we've had of him playing this well throughout the entirety of last season. More importantly, his ability to just shoot over people, the turnaround jump shots, the post game, it's all there. The 3-point shots falling, which is the biggest part of it. It makes you wonder if we defended last year that even though we didn't really like what Steven Alves was doing, that it was kind of warranted that he didn't run many plays for Jabari because Jabari wasn't good at that point. Well, maybe there was some level of, obviously different players got him to develop. Maybe there was something to the fact that maybe he needs some place to get in rhythm.
And help develop.
Yeah.
It's sort of a chicken or the egg thing. But yeah, that's the other argument is do you need to give him those plays for the sake of his development and getting him to where you want him to be?
Yeah, and I think he's notable. He overachieved or he surpassed my expectations on his ability to drive and get to the rim last year already. He's doing so even more this year. I noticed he's able to dribble or to contort his body, getting so low down to the floor for a guy his size, for a guy that's 6'11", that it's hard for teams to steal from him when he's driving. I don't know if that's an adjustment that's on purpose or what it is, but that's something that he wasn't doing at Auburn. And it's weird. It's looking like he's actually a good guy. Like he's good going inside. It's not something that I think it's something that most people projected to be a weakness for a few years, but he's just just gotten so much better at it. And it's also a fluidity thing. He's at the same time gotten bulkier, but also more fluid and maybe looks more comfortable like in his own body than he did last year, which is kind of rare. Usually when guys put on weight, they lose fluidity, but maybe with him it was not really a fluidity thing, maybe it was a strength thing, and maybe he has the strength to control his body more, just when he's impulsing from just moving, right? So I think he looks like a completely different player. As you guys know, I was a Paulo guy throughout the draft. I didn't overreact to Jabari Smith's last season, but this season he looks like a completely different player. And it's really exciting, and I would not be surprised if he was the best player on this team, just because he's the easiest guy to get looks for. He's just going to shoot over people. What are you going to do about it? He's the only guy on this team that can get. If he's hitting those shots, it really doesn't take much effort to get in those shots. So yeah. As far as Fred VanVleet goes, I think it's night and day from KPJ, right? The willingness to give up the ball quickly, the snappy passes, like he's KPJ.
To me, I mentioned it earlier, it's the fact that he rewards the cutters. That really is massive because it incentivizes guys like Jalen Green to move off ball the way that when it doesn't happen, then it's going to be more likely they just stand with their hands on their hips and play your turn, my turn.
Yeah, I agree, and he kept obviously he is a 8 assists a game guy, right? So you'd expect this to be the case, but it's just with KPJ, it's such a night and day difference because with KPJ you need like a massive window for him to make either it's a scripted play where he has to do this and he's going to do it no matter if it's there or not, or in order for him to do something instinctively, you needed a massive window for him to capitalize on it. And Fred needs a sliver to sneak a pass into the roller. Fred needs like a sliver to find a cutter. It's just night and day, and it helps the offense flow a lot better. He's also been willing to take very few shots. I'm excited to see if we can get some, throwing back to Sengun's rookie season, the chemistry he had with Armani Brooks and with DJ Augustine, I think is something that can be replicated with Fred. Just those quick actions at the top of, where there's a handoff and Sengun sets a screen and they do it over and over again, and eventually the defender just loses track of it. And if it's a good shooter that can shoot from really deep, which Fred can, it regenerates open shots very easily. It's just a quick, easy way to get offense. So looking forward to that from Fred. one overarching point that I would also like to get in. Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason and Jabari Smith and Amen Thompson and even Cam Whitmore and Jalen to some extent and Sengun, like all of the guys on our, like I named the entire rotation. All of the guys on our team have very quick hands and are really, good at getting steals and blocks. Yeah. It's not just an overreaction from this game. I didn't really think about this storyline, before the season. But if you look at them individually and what they did last year and what they did in college, and for the vets, what they've been doing in the NBA so far, they're all pretty high steal type of guys. So they're going to generate a lot of turnovers. And as long as it doesn't fall too far to the other end and everybody's gambling, I think that's a fun identity to have as a team. And then I guess I'll quickly touch on. Well, I have to touch on Sengun's defense because otherwise people will say I'm a hater. Sengun does look a lot better on defense. It's mostly because he's being put in a position where the drop isn't as far down, and then they show a little bit on the pick and roll where he's able to be free or closer to the ball in order to be able to use the one skill he has on defense, which is he has good hands, and he is a quick thing that he'll get. Even last year and the year before, the one saving grace was, well, when he was on the floor for long stretches of time in his rookie season, was, well, this guy gets a lot of steals and a lot of blocks. And he's being put in a position to capitalize on that more this year than what he did last year, where his job was basically to be a stand at the rim, try to block shots type of center, just a really deep drop, and he wasn't able to, he was only getting to use his hands when guys were jumping all over him. So that's a nice change. It doesn't change the fact that I still have my doubts about him defensively, just because even though you can hide him in this way, or you can minimize his weaknesses or maximize his strengths defensively in this way, doesn't exactly mean that in the best version of this team, this is the type of center we have. I'm still not sold on that, but it was encouraging. And on offense, he does grease the wheels like he always has, even though he's not getting the post touch that we would hope that he would get, or at least looking at last year's offense, we would hope that he would have gotten. And then I'll get to finish off my kind of segment thing. I think I'm talking for 15 minutes here or whatever. I'll finish on the bright note, so I'll start with Jason. Listen, I just don't see a point. Jason is a great player. He can fill a role. He's a niche type of player. He'll be useful to some team settings. This team needs the shooting way too much. As I said to begin the pod, he's moving all the time and he's getting in guys' ways. And he's like a scramble player, right? He's good in scramble situations, but at the same time, we have a lot of guys that are good in scramble situations, and I don't really see the need for him, especially with how many defensive wings we have. I'd rather give the minutes to either Reggie Bullock, who showed the ability we all know he has of just quick trigger, hitting threes off balance, and catch and shoot shots, obviously. But with Jay Shine, it's just like, love him. I'm sure he'll be a fan favorite in a contender. If he went and played for the Heat, he would be a fan favorite, for example. Just for this team, we have a lot of what he brings already, so it doesn't really make much sense to give him those minutes, especially since transitioning into my last guy, especially since Cam Whitmore just looks amazing. I mean, he doesn't look out of place one bit. He's, in his rookie year, and I had this take back during Summer League, and everybody said, oh no, when he plays in the NBA, it will be completely different. He's already at the level offensively that KJ Martin was, as far as cutting and as far as using his athleticism to be an off-ball threat.
But he's a superior shooter by far.
Yeah, and that was my next one. He's already a superior shooter by far. He can generate his own shot to some extent. He can shoot from deeper. His release takes a lot less time. He's just an improved version of KJ Martin on offense already. And then on defense, that was where KJ Martin fell short. I mean, he did get highlight blocks, but he was terrible on ball, and he lost track of guys off ball all the time. And for the casual fan, they'll look at at it and say, oh, he had blocks, so he must be a good off-ball defender. No, because he wasn't a good defender at either of the major categories. And Whitmore is, right? It's just we upgraded massively from KJ, and this guy's 19 years old. Not to jump the gun, and I know a lot of people out there have been saying this, but I sort of agree. He looks a lot like Jaylen Brown and Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards more on the jump shot side, and the slashing side. Jaylen Brown, I think, more on a little. He's still a little bit stiffer than what Anthony Edwards is as far as his handle goes.
For sure.
So, but I can see the comps, and I can see the athleticism, and I can see the way they get their shots off. I can see a lot of the similarities, and I think Ime Udoka sees it too, because he mentioned the only guy that he mentioned out the gate that was kind of surprising in media day was Cam Whitmore, and then, well, he's playing. I mean, he played less last night. I'm not really sure why, but he played significant minutes the first time around. Oh, probably because of Dillon Brooks. Why didn't I make that connection?
Yeah, a combination of Dillon Brooks, and they also didn't have Reggie Bullock the first game either.
True. So I think, man, he's ready. He's ready to get minutes right now. He's really young. You can groom him to be, at least the first few years of his career, to play more off ball. And as he gets more settled into that role, he can then expand his game. And maybe, he was projected to go top 5 because he has star potential. Just because he dropped to 20 doesn't make it any harder for me to say that he has star potential. Right? And this team has a lot of guys with star potential and a lot of guys that can play on ball. Well, Whitmore is someone who can play off ball for now, and because of that, you managed to play. You can still play him, and if he couldn't, it would be a Josh Christopher type situation where you're trying to force him into an off ball role. He can't really play it, so he doesn't really get minutes, and that eventually hurts his development. No, Whitmore can for now play off ball. I think he deserves those minutes. He gives you something that Jason Tate doesn't, if that's his competition. If his competition is Reggie Bullock, it gets a little bit tougher, but I do think, I think it would have to be a contest of who performs better. But Cam Whitmore was, besides Jabari Smith, my biggest standout. It will be really, really hard to keep him out of the rotation and send him to the G League if he's playing this well. Especially because if he goes to the G League, he's going to be there and he's going to be the best guy on the team and he's going to be playing on ball all the time. And it would be good for us to develop him or continue to develop him off ball before we move him onto the on ball role. Kind of like what happened with Jaylen Brown, who came into the league not really as an on ball guy, but eventually developed into one because he was allowed to go into a team that slowly brought him along as an on ball threat.
Yeah, so I wanted to lead off talking about the top 7 or 8 guys because I wanted to close out talking about the considerations at the end of the rotation, which may come into greater focus next week because, of course, once you get inside of a week to the start of the regular season, which next Wednesday will be, then oftentimes the final game or two, Rockets play Wednesday in San Antonio and Friday at home. I believe you see a lot of teams start to transition to playing less starters, less obvious rotation guys, and more guys towards the end of the bench, because not only are you trying to decide the last few roster spots, the last few rotation spots, but you're also trying to keep the mainstays healthy so that they're ready to go if anybody picks up a nagging injury, like we did see Tari Eason turn his ankle in the first game. Of course, it hasn't kept him out because he's Iron Man. He played in all 82 a year ago, one of only 10 NBA players to do so, so we shouldn't be surprised. But the point is, as we move forward to the second week of the preseason, you may see some guys towards the back half of the rotation and even towards the bottom of the roster play a little bit more as the Rockets try and not necessarily put the main guys in bubble wrap, but make sure they're as healthy as they can be heading to the Wednesday, October 25th opener in Orlando against Paulo Banchero and the Magic. As far as guys towards the end of the rotation, to me, there's 2 battles to watch, and I want to get your take on it. I was going to say Cam Whitmore versus Reggie Bullock, but I think we can throw Jason Tate in there as well. I think there's going to be one guy of those 3 that doesn't initially play on an every night basis. And going into training camp, going into media day, I thought that Cam Whitmore, given how young he is, given the fact that you can easily put him in the G League, might be the guy that's most likely to fill that role simply because it's not as big of a deal if you don't play him. But at this point, I know it's just 2 games, but if Cam continues to play at the level that he has, for the reasons you just laid out, it's going to be very difficult to justify not playing him, especially on a Rockets team that does need more shooting. That's the clear deficiency for this team as currently constructed. They need better floor spacing. And so Cam has the potential to do that. And then if you have Cam in the rotation, then it leaves you with Reggie Bullock and Jayshawn Tate, whereas I think Tate clearly is higher on the trust tier of Ime Udoka at the moment. Also helps that he was with the team in the offseason at the start of training camp, whereas Reggie Bullock was a late entrant. I think Reggie has the advantage clearly with shooting. He's a 38% career three-point shooter, and it's not like he's a slouch defensively, even if Tate is a bit more versatile, and of course he's several years younger, so he may still have peak athleticism. So I think you compare those 3 guys, I think there's a way you can play 2 of them, especially if Ime, and it seems that he is committed to playing 9, 10 guys in his rotation out at the gate. But I think it's going to be tough to play all 3. So I'm curious to see who the odd man out is. My guess is that initially it might be Bullock, simply because, again, I think it's hard to keep Cam out of the rotation as he's playing right now. And I just think with Bullock being a late entrant to the team, it might be a little bit easier to say, hey, this guy's still learning the system. These other guys were with us in the offseason with the program. And then perhaps you have an injury and you can just slide Bullock in at a later time. And I think it's just sort of easier to explain that. But I don't think it's a given. I think between those 3 guys, you can make a case, honestly, for any of them. And Ime is going to have to choose, in my opinion, assuming health, 2 of the 3 to play. And then the other choice is going to be between Jeff Green and Jock Landale. I thought Landale was one of the only negatives of this week. He only played in the first game. Second game sat out due to ankle injury maintenance. We know he turned it for Australia, but he just did not look mobile at all in that opener against the Pacers. And I thought Jeff Green, even though he only played 10 minutes, I thought he moved very well. He allows the Rockets to truly be 5 out, to switch on all the actions. And when you look at who that second unit is comprised of, and we know Amen Thompson needs guys to space the floor so that he can drive and to sort of offset his shooting deficiencies at the moment. I think between Jeff being more trustworthy on the perimeter, I think his ability to truly play 5 out, I think it's more of a contrast to Şengün. If there's some matchups where athletically you're having a tough time matching up, I think Jeff Green is more of a contrast relative to Jock Landale. And the fact that Landale right now just simply does not appear healthy. He does not appear to be moving anywhere near as fluidly as he did for the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs last May. To me, Jeff Green has a slight leg up there. I know he's played in just 1 game for 10 minutes, so it's the ultimate in small sample size. But to me, for a number of reasons, the spacing with Amen Thompson, the 5 out if you need a contrast from Alperen Şengün, which you might in a lot of these matchups, or if he gets into foul trouble because the matchup just isn't conducive to a traditional big, then Jeff Green gives you a different look. And then his superior 3-point shooting and the floor spacing and balance that provides with Amen Thompson, who is typically out there with the second unit, which is where that guy is most likely to play that role, that choice of Jeff Green or Jock Landale. Then to me, I give, at least at the moment, based on what we've seen, the upper hand to Jeff Green. But to me, Green versus Landale, and then pick 2 of the 3 between Cam Whitmore, Jayshawn Tate, and Reggie Bullock. To me, that's the battles to watch for as we talk about the final rotation spots. Paulo, what do you think about those considerations? And is there anyone else that you see potentially in the mix?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on the Jeff Green versus Jock Landale situation. I think Jeff should just play at this point. And I think Landale might just become a backup in case someone gets hurt. His contract is, even though it's 4 years, it's just 1 year guaranteed. He's
Right.
clearly not healthy. And I don't know, maybe the new haircut, which, Jock, if you're listening to this, please do not
We still
go
want him on
with
the
that
podcast
again.
as a guest.
Yeah, we do. Well, God, dude, please. Your old hair was perfect. But it's just I think Jeff is, as you said, offensively he can. When we saw him play here with James Harden, we know what he can bring as a small ball 5, as a guy that can set screens but also do the inverted pick and rolls if need be. He had one of them, I think, that I noticed, but I don't think he ended up on it being a drive. He was just handling the ball on a couple of screens. But he offensively, he's obviously a lot more versatile. But I think most important of all, it's defensively. If you can play, if you play the second unit that they were playing last night, and or they were playing 2 games ago, and you replace Jeff Green with Jock Landale with Jeff Green, you can now switch 1-5. Which is a big deal because it simplifies the defense a lot more for everybody. You don't got to worry about having one guy that can't switch and everybody else can. So I think it just makes sense. And it's a testament to how 37-year-old Jeff Green is still as mobile as he's ever been, still as athletic. I mean, maybe not as athletic, but he can still dunk it.
Close.
Yeah, he can still dunk it pretty well let alone for a 37-year-old, just for a 30-year-old. So maybe it's the Green name that comes with the extra athleticism, because if you guys obviously remember, Gerald Green was really old, or not really old, but he was on the older side, and he still had the insane hops he's always had.
Yep.
So I think it just makes sense to play Jeff at this point. And then on the other debate, if it were up to me, Bullock and Cam Whitmore would play. If it were up to Stephen Silas, I would bet that Bullock and Jason Tate play. Since it's up to Ime Udoka and he's shown not a bias, but a liking towards Whitmore and what we've seen him say so far, I'm guessing Whitmore plays. And then between Bullock and Tate, I think Tate will probably play, but I don't think it will last very long. Just because, as I said, just have a lot of guys that can do what Jason Tate can, and at the same time be somewhat passable shooters. So I think probably Tate and Whitmore to start off, but I think eventually Bullock's going to move into Tate's spot.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of this may resolve itself if there are injuries, which inevitably there are over the course of 82 games. It'll be interesting to see how much the Rockets are willing to push the envelope. But I agree, with Cam showing you what he's done to this point, he's above G League stature. At this point, there's a clear need that he can fill. So I think even though it would be easiest politically, and I think the Rockets probably looked at this as the most likely scenario in the offseason, to have Cam be the odd man out. And maybe even at the start of training camp when they added Reggie Bullock, at this point, you're going to have to find one of those other guys to have a slightly uncomfortable conversation with. And I just think that Bullock might be the easiest one right out of the chute, because he was a late arrival. He wasn't with them in their offseason program. He wasn't with them to start training camp. He wasn't ready the first preseason game. But I think he'll ultimately get opportunities. There will be back-to-backs. There will be injuries. And then at some point, if he shoots well enough, then he may force his way ahead of Jason Tate simply based on that, because we know shooting is a deficiency for this team. Reggie Bullock is a career 38% guy. He's got a quick release. He can hold his own defensively. At 6'7", he's got a fairly stocky frame. He can guard a number of positions. At some point on this team, it feels like even if it's not game one on the 25th in Orlando, he's going to force his way into the equation. He just might have to wait a little bit, because Cam Whitmore, even at 19 years old, is ready a bit sooner than any of us expected, and that's only a good thing for the Rockets as they accelerate their rebuild into phase 2. All right, as we wind down the pod, last topic is, of course, the week ahead. 2 games against the Spurs and 1 against the Miami Heat, I believe, to wrap up the preseason. The highlights, of course, are the 2 against the Spurs and Victor Wembanyama. As far as themes to watch for, of course, we've laid out on an individual level and for the Rockets as a team what stood out thus far. For the most part, you simply want to see those things continuing, because, again, when you're 2-0, you're winning by an average margin of more than 25 points per game. You're second in net rating, top 5 on both sides of the ball. You just want to keep it rolling and continue to build more confidence and more positive habits in these young players you're trying to develop. But as far as the 2 games against the Spurs, to me, the biggest individual storyline is going to be Jabari against Wemby, simply based on their frames. I think they're going to get a lot of time against one another, assuming Wemby doesn't duck the matchup. Sorry, I've got to get that in there, because we know what Victor did when the Rockets did not land the top pick in the draft lottery, and Jabari actually went out of his way to note it on Twitter. So this will be his opportunity to show Wemby what he's missing out on. I hope Wemby is ready for the smoke. Of course, I'm sure he will be, because to this point, Wemby has looked very good himself. He's playing against the Heat. Very positive start as we're recording this podcast Friday night. And of course, Wemby and Chet Holmgren had a great meeting a couple of nights ago in the preseason opener between the Spurs and the Thunder. But just as Wemby and Chet was a storyline, because you're talking about 2 bigs from the last 2 drafts very high, and Chet is still considered a rookie because didn't play last year due to injury. In many respects, it's the same storyline with Wemby and Jabari, number 3, right behind Chet in the 2022 draft. And even though Jabari did play a year ago, as we've noted plenty of times, he at 19 years old, turning 19 just before the draft, was one of the youngest guys in his entire draft class. So he's just now getting to the point physically, mentally, to where I think you can reasonably expect him to contribute at an NBA level. Obviously, he's done it to this point, and there will be length with Wemby. Whenever you're talking about a 7'3" generational athlete, that's something new to contend with. But I also think beyond any just individual one-on-one matchup, I think it'll be fun to see how Jabari handles the stage, because even with it being the preseason, assuming Wemby plays, that's going to be the matchup that everyone circles. Then you add in the offseason commentary. To this point, one thing that stood out about Jabari is that he seems to play his best ball when it matters most. We've talked about the late shots he had against the Pacers last year, the game winner against the Pelicans. And so I think above all else, you just want to see Jabari embrace the moment. He's playing well now. He's in rhythm. And I think this is a unique opportunity, even in the preseason, just to see how he handles the stage of an opponent who's probably going to be motivated, and there's going to be a lot of attention because even in the preseason, it's Wemby. This is the first chance for a lot of NBA fans to watch him. And at this point, again, it's the preseason. There's only so much you can take. But I think Jabari versus Wemby is clearly the leading storyline, right?
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be interesting because, well, Jabari is going to be Wemby's matchup because they're not playing him at the 5 just yet.
Right.
So they're going to be matched up against each other, and Jabari is usually a shoot over you type of guy, and that doesn't really fly with Wemby because, well, you can't shoot over him.
Or you have to get a ridiculous amount of separation, and
yeah.
Jabari's handle has improved. I don't know if it's to the point where he can shake Wemby yet, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, so I'm guessing there's going to be a clip of Wemby blocking Jabari, and it's going to go viral, and it's going to be really annoying, but I wonder if Jabari's improved driving game will help him out at any point. Just because he's a lot stronger than Wemby, and if he goes to dunk it, I'm not sure Wemby can really stop him if he buries him under the rim.
Or at bare minimum, get to the free throw line.
Yeah, and then other than that, I think the Spurs are running Jeremy Sohan as the point guard. It's just a bunch of weird stuff going on over in San Antonio. So I think we should be able to win. Especially defensively, I don't see, unless Wemby just goes off, I don't see how they can really score on the Rockets offense. Just a bunch of, and I don't know, I'm not going to talk shit on the Spurs, so we'll talk about it. We'll talk shit on them after we win. But it should be a couple of easy wins as long as guys remain as committed as they've been to defense. Because on offense, they are a bad offensive team. I think they'll be a bad offensive team. Against what it's looking like it's going to be a good offensive team, so you just have to outscore them, which shouldn't be hard because they're not really that impressive beyond Wemby, Sohan, and Vassell on defense. Yeah, that's the main storyline. I'm gonna be looking for some Jalen Green bounce back games. He usually plays well against the Spurs. I'm going to be looking at a lot of guys' jump shots to see if they're falling, because thus far, besides Jabari Smith and Cam Whitmore, it's been rough.
Although I will say we can shit talk them because this is Texas hate week. You've got Astros, Rangers in the ALCS, and you've got 2 Rockets Spurs games. It'll be interesting to see, by the way, one final note on it, if Ime Udoka or Greg Popovich, who of course are good friends, Ime came up in the Popovich tree, worked for several years as an assistant in San Antonio. Interesting to see if either team perhaps holds some things back because they do meet again in that same building in San Antonio in the second game of the regular season on Friday the 27th. So you might see a little bit of hesitation to truly, I guess, treat it as a regular season tune-up because you don't want to show the other team what you're going to do when it actually matters on Friday the 27th. But look, in terms of having fun, look, it's Rockets Spurs, it's Astros Rangers. Dude, let's shit talk the entire week, and hopefully by the end of it, Houston wins all 4, or all 6, I should say, 4-0 in the ALCS and 2-0 against the Spurs. And when we talk this time next weekend, it's going to be lit as all hell, right?
Yeah, I think, just talking about the Astros one, there's one pitcher on the Rangers that's basically, it's going to come down to this. I think that the Rangers is just not going to be competitive at all. So I think it's either a 4-0 or a 4-1, depending on how, I can't remember his name. It's a Hispanic name, but there's a guy there's a pitcher for I'm pretty sure he plays for the Rangers, who is either, let me see if I can get my references straight. I'll do an answer. Who's either Justin Verlander or Fremer on a bad day against the Astros, and he either gives up 8 runs or he shuts us out. It's not Perez. Is it Perez? They have?
Perez is the lefty. They have Jordan Montgomery, who's the other lefty. I think you're thinking of Martin Perez because, yeah, he's had some games against the Astros where he's been otherworldly. There's others. He's in the bullpen now where he gets blown up. Andrew Haney is another. But, yeah, I think you're thinking of Martin Perez.
Yeah, so if that, I don't know if he's starting for them or not, but if that guy
swing roll,
the only possibility is if he is prime Verlander against us, then we may lose one game. Other than that,
they'll probably have him in a bit of a swing role because while Max Scherzer may return, I think what people are forgetting when you're seeing all these Scherzer may come back storylines, yeah, he will, but he'll be limited to about 70 pitches. He's not going to be 100 pitch Max Scherzer coming off an arm issue in his pitching arm. That's just not how it works. So while Scherzer might be on the roster, it'd be a situation where he only pitches 3 or 4 innings in all likelihood. And then you need a swing guy like a Martin Perez or Bradford's another lefty they have to sort of eat up innings in the interim because it's not like the Rangers have any great relievers anyway for the most part. So, yeah, Martin's going to play a role.
I mean, hopefully he does come back, and if he does, I doubt he can go more than 2 innings without being pulled. Just not because of pitches, just because he sucks. But whatever. But yeah, I don't think. Listen, Jordan's on fire, Altuve's on fire, Pena is not hitting homers.
On fire.
Abreu is on fire. Pena's not hitting homers yet, but I think he's got a pretty decent batting average. He's getting on base. And now you're facing the team that's going to wake up Kyle Tucker because, well, he owns them. So
Good point.
I don't think this is going to go well. And
yeah,
it's the playoffs have arrived, right? This is what the Astros do. I don't think it's going to be close.
I think it's absolutely massive that the Astros won that game 4 in Minnesota to set up their pitching for the first couple of games. Because I think this is a series where...
What are you talking about? Everybody knows that off days are bad.
Oh, geez, that's nonsense. Of course, if that's the case, the Rangers had even more because they won their series against the Orioles in 3. But look, in all seriousness, we know what the Astros did against the Rangers in the regular season. And regardless of what the Rangers say, I do think there's some psychological scarring that comes from losing 5 of 6 games, most of them in blowout fashion, to the Astros down the stretch of the season when we all knew going into those series that it was likely those would determine the American League West. And ultimately they did. I think the Rangers need something to go their way early in the series. And if they can't get it going against Verlander, not sure if they'll start Framber or Javier in game 2. That'll be an interesting consideration because both will be on full rest. But I think if the Astros can win those games at home and start off on the right foot with hopefully Verlander doing in game 1 of this ALCS what he did in game 1 of the 2022 ALCS against the Yankees, 6 innings, 1 run, 11 strikeouts, then at some point if the Astros have a fast start, then there's going to be a little bit of sort of psychological scars that start to open up for the Rangers because even when they go home and perhaps get a lift, it's not going to be as big of a lift when you go home and 50% of the crowd is probably Astros fans and it's the same field where the Astros 6 weeks ago just absolutely demolished them coming off of Labor Day here in the United States. Key to the series, besides starting well and sort of keeping that psychological hold you have on them, I would say watch Framber Valdez. I was very critical of him after he got blown up against the Twins. But one thing that makes me feel a little bit better about Framber in this matchup, besides the fact that he did pitch very well, that was one of his only big game success stories against the Rangers in Arlington down the stretch of this season. I also think the Rangers have a lot of lefties when you look at Seager, now Evan Carter, Nathaniel Lowe. There's a lot of guys they trust in their lineup that are left-handed, and that plays to Framber's skill set, and especially if you can neutralize Seager at the top. And Evan Carter, who since he got called up, one of the downsides for the Astros, by the way, if Adolis Garcia doesn't hurt his knee trying to pull back that Michael Brantley home run in that series where the Astros just took them to the woodshed, then Evan Carter, their top prospect, probably doesn't debut this year. Instead, that gave them the opportunity to see what he had, and ultimately he's been really, really good. But to get back to the point, he's left-handed, and so I think that might give Framber a little bit of a chance because the one thing about the Twins, they had a number of righties on their bench that you could put in, and one of them, Farmar, was the guy who got him for the 2-run shot early in the game that put the Twins in charge. And that's one of those guys that the Rangers don't have righties of that caliber to sort of plug and play in place of those lefties. So if Fromber can use that to his advantage and get back on track, and Verlander and Javier can stay in the form they've been in, then yeah, I'm with you. I think the Astros, as long as they start well, they have a little bit of a mental hold on the Rangers. And I won't be as aggressive as you. I'll say Astros in 6, but I don't think it's going to be an all-time series. I think the Astros are a better team. I respect the Rangers offense. There's going to be a game or two at least where they score 7-8 runs because it's what they do. They stress you out. But these are the postseason Astros. There's extra days off between game 2 and game 3 and game 5 and game 6. So you can be a little more aggressive with your bullpen. Jose Urquidy is rounding into form. And so this is as good as I felt about the Astros pitching all year. That's been where they're vulnerable. Now you add in a 4th starter finally emerging, Javier getting back to where he was a year ago, and there's just something to be said for the trust factor of the Astros in October. I think that's what we've seen over really the past 2 weeks. It was the final week of the regular season when they sort of had to win out or win 5 of 6 to get into the postseason, win the American League West in the first place. There's just a trust factor with the Astros in this spot after all of these years. Their 7th straight American League Championship Series. And it's, at least for me, it's tough to see this being a spot where they fall short of the American League pennant. I think this is another one the Astros are going to put up in the rafters, and hopefully a World Series after that. We'll see what happens with the Phillies and the Diamondbacks. Anyway, that's enough baseball talk for this because, of course, at the Logger Line, we're a basketball podcast. And thankfully,
just
go ahead.
One thing.
Jump in.
I just realized that so Jordan's on fire, and they have the dude from the Red Sox that he matched against in the playoffs 2 years ago.
Nathan Uvalde. Yeah.
Dude, this is too easy. And they have the guy from the Yankees that also they hit the walk-off off of.
Yeah,
Jesus.
There's good karma here.
Did they intentionally pick all of the guys that have like a inferiority complex against the Astros? I don't get it.
Well, keep in mind, the Astros have had so many deep playoff runs. I feel like they have stories against half the league at this point in terms of crossing paths and the high leverage moment, just because the Astros keep being there time after time. So I think that's a little bit of it. You can find guys across the board that have matched up with the Astros in some big spot, just simply because the Astros are continually in these big spots. All right. Well, for today, this is where we will adjourn. If you want more content from us in the interim before our next episode, you can get it on Twitter or X. I'm on there at Ben DuBose. Paulo is on there at Paulo Alves NBA. And this show is on there at the Logger Line, where if you hit up the link tree in the bio, you can find links to Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire of USA Today Sports Media Group, all of our friends, partners, and sponsors. And so if you click on those links, you can consume their content, help us out. You've also got the ability to find Apple, Google, Spotify, all of our distributors. You can access them through that link tree as well. Again, the Logger Line on Twitter. And then if you have not already, subscribe, leave a positive rating, do everything you can to support this podcast. We would greatly appreciate that. All right, with the plugs done, we'll wrap it. For Paulo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.